One of the things with the Ukraine war now is we're discovering, and everyone discovered this in World War II and in World War One and in every war the Russians have ever been in. Year one is a disaster. And then in year two, the Russians mobilize and start throwing bodies at the problem. And by the time we got to Stalingrad, there were a lot of
A
bodies
lot of
being
bodies.
thrown. And in the assault going both east and especially west into Germany, uh, the Russians were regularly suffering 4-to-1 casualty ratios, but they just kept coming. And when we realized that that was going to be the nature of the fight
Hmm.
post Germany, the only way you stop the bodies in that number is with even more bodies. And since there were as many Soviets as there were Europeans, we
Hmm.
needed everyone.
Jeez. Is that part of the calculus for Ukraine now, that this is the year where we throw bodies at it, type of a thing?
Well, yeah, absolutely. So it's Russia, so data, who knows? Um, but our best guess is that by the time we get to May, the Ukrainians will have brought in 60,000 fresh troops that have trained with NATO with new gear that
Mm-hmm.
will make it the toughest fighting force in Europe aside from the United States itself. And arguably, considering our force posture in Europe, maybe even tougher. But the Russians will have another 500,000 men in theater. And so you're talking about 600,000 to 700,000 Russians on the front compared to the 100,000 that they started with. So we're about to start the second chapter. This is a fundamentally different conflict now.
And they look at it, they look at the bodies, and that's just part of their planning. They're not looking at
Yeah.
technology and how to mitigate risk to force and that sort of a thing. They're just looking at, like they have
Yeah.
previously. They go back in their history and say, "Oh, we just throw another 500,000 people at this. This is a numbers game."
Yeah,
Regardless of,
there's pros and cons if you're not Russian. I mean, if you're Russian, the numbers are pretty obvious. I mean, the cons is that's a lot of people, and Ukraine can only win this if it's a battle of movement where they can inflict 8-to-1 casualty ratios. And we've had a muddy winter. It hasn't gotten cold enough to freeze the ground. They haven't been able to move her with their tanks at all, and so they've been stuck in these head-to-head battles in places like Bakhmut, where they're suffering casualties they can't afford. And in a battle where the Ukrainians kill 3 times as many Russians as they lose, that's a battle the Ukrainians lost.
mm,
They need to get this up to at least 8-to-1 to have a chance. On the other side, by the end of this year, the Russians will have committed at least 100,000 men. We're already approaching 200,000 casualties, which probably means approaching 200,000 deaths because Russian battlefield triage and medical is atrocious. Um, 1 million men have fled. There are 8 million men in their 20s in Russia. So 1 million is gone, not coming back. The other million is getting chopped up. That still leaves them 6 million to go, but this is Russia's last generation.
mhm.
So even if the Russians do manage to overwhelm Ukraine this year and start what will turn into the greatest genocide since World War II, um, this is going to take a lot of men, and this is the last conventional war that the Russians will be capable of fighting.
You talk about that in here, which was
Mhm.
2014. Is that when this came out? 20.
It sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah, 2014. I read it in 2016, but you essentially have a few paragraphs in here that talks about the exact, not just what was going to happen, but the exact year that it was going to
Yeah.
happen by. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. When this started going down, I'm like, I've read this somewhere before because I used it in a novel, and then I went back to this book. I'm like, oh my goodness. And not only does he say, because a lot of people can say, hey, it's going to happen, and they throw it out there, and when it does, they say, oh, look, I was brilliant, and these things are very obvious. But you put it the exact date on it. You said it will happen by this date because of X, Y, and Z. And sure enough, it exactly happened that way. Like there was, with a month, not even a month to spare, essentially. It's quite remarkable. I mean,
Well, thank you very much. And not to toot my own horn, although, toot toot. Um, that wasn't the only war that I think is going to happen. The second book is about the 3 big conflicts of the era that we're in now, and the Ukraine war is just the first one. We've got 2 more brewing, one in the Middle East between the Persians and the Saudis, and another one in the eastern rim of Asia, most likely involving the Chinese and the Japanese, whether it's because of the Japanese throwing a Hail Mary, I'm sorry, whether it's because of the Chinese throwing a Hail Mary or the war that follows the Chinese disintegration. There's going to be a slug match out there.